Welcome to the Kolbecast, episode 208. Thank you for joining us. As we approach the end of the school year and graduation, we're pleased to host a Kolbe reunion with alumni Hope, Charlie, and Ian joining Bonnie, Jordan, and me. From favorite memories to how Kolbe shaped what has come after, we hope you'll enjoy this retrospective of how Kolbe Academy provides a solid foundation for everything else to come. We hope that you'll enjoy the show.
Hi there, I'm Bonnie, Kolbe homeschooling mom of 4 lads and lasses, liturgical musician, popcorn, and podcast fanatic.
And this is Stephen, homeschooling father of 5 and chief homeschooling officer for Kolbe Academy.
And I'm Jordan. As a product of homeschooling, I'm proud to teach Greek and Latin for Kolbe online and serve as the alumni and public relations director.
Okay, so we're recording this in the springtime, but this episode will air during graduation season. So we thought it would be fun to gather a few Kolbe alumni who are in various stages of life post-Kolbe and life after Kolbe, and just check in with them, catch up with them, get them talking and hearing about how Kolbe is still with them in some ways and what they have drawn from that and just what they're up to these days. So we have my sister Hope, who works with us behind the scenes on the Kolbecast these days. We're glad you're back on mic today.
Hi, glad to be here again.
We also have Charlie, whom we met in episode 18, one of the brave souls who was in the first slew of Kolbecast episodes. Hi, Charlie. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me back.
Really great to see you. And we have Ian from episode 160. Ian, how are you?
I'm doing very well. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you. So these guys are all back to visit with us, catch up a little bit. So I would like to spend more time hearing them talk than me. So Ian, let's start with you. This is your first year post-Kolbe, and I don't mean to steal any more of your thunder. So tell us about you and where you are these days and how far out you are from your Kolbe years.
Well, I'm currently at Magdalen College of Liberal Arts in New Hampshire. I was seeking to be a theology major here. The school is now shutting down. I think my next steps is to go to Holy Apostle College online. Once again, I'm going to go to online school. So I guess the atmosphere of Kolbe is never going to leave me because of online-ness,
Okay.
if you want to put it that way.
You kind of know what to expect there. When you did Kolbe, were you mostly online or did you do a mix?
I was kind of half online and half just homeschool. I took the theology and language courses, specifically those online, along with some sciences, and then the history and literatures were off.
Okay. And as I mentioned, you were with us on episode 160, A Legendary Occasion. If my memory serves, we got that title from something you said in your recording. We were all in Atlanta together for the commencement festivities and visited with you a little bit at the end of that. And I think you described it as such. And so that stuck with us and this fun little memory there and connection. So yeah. What sorts of things have you enjoyed your first year of college? And have you discovered any new interests or hobbies or anything like that?
Once again, the spiritual life, both on Kolbe and on Magdalen, it kind of transfers from here to there. The spiritual life in particular here, with daily rosaries, daily chaplets, daily mass, stations to the cross, everything else, it's really a wonderful thing to engage in all of that, especially since it's going to help you in your spiritual growth. And it's not only the spiritual life, but just the student life on campus, I guess, as well, because with a small campus we have with not even 60 students, you know literally everybody, and everybody's got a connection with everybody. There's nobody whom you don't know.
Close-knit group, sounds like. That's neat. All right, Charlie, as I mentioned, you were one of the brave folks who came to visit with us early on in episode 18, Homer and the Hunger Games. How have you been since then, and what's been going on?
A lot has been going on. A lot. I guess since then specifically, it's probably easier to pick up the story from when I left Kolbe. But things were good. Yeah, I graduated from Kolbe. I think it was our first in-person graduation that Kolbe had ever done in Atlanta. It was just a fantastic experience. It was really cool seeing everyone after being on online classes with these folks with some of them for like 6 years, actually being in person on a momentous day like your graduation day was a lot of emotions, but that was really excellent. That was really cool. And then after that, I went to the University of Dallas. I enrolled there. I was there for 4 years. I graduated with a degree in drama with a business minor. I'd gone in as a business major, and then I'd always been involved in the performing arts growing up. So I did one play, and they got their hooks into me, and then suddenly I was a drama major before I knew it. And at the same time, I met a girl in my sophomore year that I just fell head over heels for. So I made two big decisions, which was to go out with her and to become a drama major. And by the time I was in my senior year, my biggest problem was how I was going to convince her dad to let me marry his daughter as a drama major with kind of limited prospects in terms of how I was going to support her. So, yeah, so that's where the business minor helped out a little bit. I ended up getting a job working in healthcare. It took me to Austin, Texas, and we were married last October, I guess 2 Octobers ago now. So we've been married for a little over a year. And we actually had our first, my son Charlie, in July of this year. So it's been a busy few years since Kolbe, but yeah, moved out of Austin and now we're in Pittsburgh. So yeah, looking forward to settling down a little bit here in the next few years. It's been a whirlwind.
Wow, yes. That's a great word for it. It's all, yeah.
We should include Charlie's graduation speech from Kolbe in the notes here, because he did an awesome speech at that graduation that you mentioned. That was for, I think, for the whole community. That was a really special occasion, because it was that first one where we're seeing everybody. I think you had been my student for 4 years, maybe. I don't know. It was way back when we did the Homer and the Hunger Games. It's because I did a summer class on the Hunger Games that Charlie was in. First class I ever taught at Kolbe, actually. So it was the summer before I started teaching in the fall. Charlie was there, was a big part of it, and I knew that he was going to go on and do a lot of big things. Back then, you could even tell it was. So it makes me proud. It makes me excited for you, Charlie, to hear this update. And congratulations on Charlie Jr. That's awesome.
Yes, indeed.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
Yeah, I've got to shout out the Hunger Games summer course that I took with Dr. Almenstar, because that is to date, I think one of the, when people joke, they like poke fun at me for being a homeschooler, I think that's the number one thing, was that I took a Hunger Games summer course. But I loved it. I thought I could talk your ear off about how Katniss is or is not a Christ-like figure after that course.
If Harvard can have a Taylor Swift course, I think Kolbe can have a Hunger Games course.
Definitely.
There we go.
Puts glasses on. Got him.
Yeah.
Does it come up much that you were homeschooled?
You know, it does. I think something interesting, and it's funny you mentioned the graduation speech, Dr. Almanzar, because that was kind of what I was thinking about when I was putting it together, was just how it is an unconventional thing to do, even now, even when it's growing in popularity. And I think a lot of people realized during COVID, when we were all forced to do it, kind of how effective it can be. But when I was in it, even just less than a decade ago, it was unconventional and there weren't a lot of people doing it. So I think for me, it was like a big growth moment, was going from when you're a high school kid and you just want to kind of fit in, you want to be like everyone else, being a little bit hesitant to talk about it, as I was, to being in college, and especially in an environment like University of Dallas, where there are a lot of other folks who were homeschooled. It kind of was the middle ground. And then once I had graduated from UD and I started working, I actually started like actively bringing it up, like when people would ask about me, just because it kind of went from something that was a bit unconventional and honestly a little bit of a just something I didn't want to talk about because I wanted to fit in. It turned into this thing where I became really proud of the fact that I was homeschooled, and especially where that Kolbe did, and the opportunities it gave me. So I think it was interesting to look at it now, where it's something when I talk about my fun fact at work, like that's kind of that's my go-to. It's just interesting how that happened kind of as I got a little older.
I think that's really interesting that you bring that up. Something similar happened to me. I was homeschooled, and there's a shift to where you start like talking about it as though you're proud of it or whatever. You must have already hit that. And in the speech, his speech made the graduation speech was a lot on that theme, like the unconventional nature of it. Like, why are you getting your haircut? It's a Thursday late morning or whatever it is, and shouldn't you be in school, and all those questions. And it was so well done, though. Joseph Pierce referenced it in something later. He was like the keynote speaker at that event, and he referenced it in an article or something. The speech that Charlie had written, and I just think that's really. I mean, it's amazing from a teacher's standpoint how fast all this time flies by. You know, and then having Ian in my class early on, and now he's at college. If the listeners don't know, I teach at Magdalen College part-time. So I've got Ian in my class today. In fact, we were together for an hour talking about the resurrection of Lazarus and all these things. So anyway, it's awesome. And I love that shift. I do the same now. Like I bring it up. I remember the first time I mentioned that I was homeschooled to somebody, they latched onto it because they were thinking about it for their own kids. I was probably in college, and it was somewhere in there where it started being not something that I hid anymore, where I realized people kind of want to hear about it. And now I just flaunt it, like, oh yeah, we were doing it way before it became a cool thing like it is now. Sort of.
I've had that experience too, where when I was homeschooled, I didn't want to mention it because I thought, I didn't want to be seen as different. And now that since graduating, once I establish myself in a place, I feel like I already have that grounding, and I'm not afraid that it's going to be a negative label the way that I maybe was when I was homeschooled before it was cool. And so once I've established myself, whether it's at a work thing where people know the credentials that I have since having graduated from high school, or some sort of social thing where like they meet the version of me that exists now, and they, as we're getting to know each other, like wondering about how different people develop different ways. I'm also proud to just explain and talk about, oh yeah, I was homeschooled, or make jokes about it, or otherwise give context to how I got here by talking about where I've been before with being homeschooled.
It gives us some, when we are talking to our students who are still in the midst of that, like you may feel this way now, you might not always feel this way, and I don't know. So I hope to fill out the picture for us a bit more. It's been a while since you were on mic with us, and since we're reminiscing, bring us up to date, please.
Yeah. So when I did Kolbe, online was not an option. I graduated in 2011, so I'm coming up on 13 years since I finished high school. I was a beta tester for one of the very original online classes, which was only a chat box, no audio, no video, just like basically glorified AOL with a teacher and about 6 students. So I feel a little bit like a dinosaur, but I also really enjoyed seeing how much Kolbe has embraced technology, both back then and since then. After I graduated from Kolbe, I went to a liberal arts university and ended up studying communication theory and media history, got an accidental philosophy minor, which is a very Kolbe thing to do, to just take so many classes, because they were interesting that by the time that I went in for my grad check, they were like, well, if you take one more, you can claim it as a minor. And I said, well, I was already planning on taking one more. So sure, let's check that box. After undergrad, I went to law school, and I've been out of law school about 6 years. I've worked in both private practice and public service, and dabble in a little bit of writing when I can. I've had a few articles published, which I'm pretty excited about and proud of. So yeah, that is the short version. And then back when I was on mic with Bonnie for about the first 50 episodes, I had an introduction that said I was the fun aunt to Bonnie's kids. So I hope I'm still that. I think I am.
Indeed, you are. Yes.
Fun aunt to Bonnie's kids. Yeah.
Nice. All right. So since we got y'all together, we would like to ask you some questions relating to your Kolbe experience and your state in life now. So Ian, we're going to start with you. How have you seen your Kolbe years benefit you since graduating?
Well, Kolbe has a fairly rigorous group of curricula, and those rigorous curricula prepared me in the best way for college as rigorous curricula also. To be honest, though, Magdalen's curricula seem to be easier than Kolbe's do, so that really means that, I mean, if Magdalen, being the classically Catholic college it is, would therefore be rigorous, and if Kolbe's is more rigorous than Magdalen, Kolbe's going to prepare you for wherever you want to go. And that's another thing my older brother actually said at one point when he was convincing me to go to Kolbe, because he only went to Kolbe for like a semester, and the other 3.5 years he went to a private school, and he told me that he wished he had kept going to Kolbe because that was the one semester that actually he felt prepared him for college, and the private school did not do so.
Okay.
So that's one thing Kolbe's done, really. One out of many that I didn't list in my head, but Kolbe prepared me for college by making itself difficult / rigorous.
I would say to that, I mean, Ian is the prototype in a way, I guess, of he was my student for so long and went all the way through advanced Latin 4 at Kolbe, where we're translating the Passion of Perpetua and Felicity. We've translated the whole thing, as it's there. It could be published, a new translation of it. He was a huge part of that. Then he comes to Magdalen, and it would be the same case, I think, in most colleges. And now he has to sit through a Latin 2 course because he needs the language credits. And he can be teaching the course, really. I mean, he doesn't belong in a Latin 2. It's this college level Latin 2 is very, very basic for somebody who's gone that far in Latin. And I wonder if it feels that way in other subjects also, since I don't teach anything else at Magdalen.
Well, to that I say that taking the Latin 2 course, it is honestly very good to have these little refreshing courses, in that, like, you learn all the advanced stuff in, say, Honors Latin 4. You learn the advanced stuff so much you forget the basics, so you need a refresher of those. But yeah, it's a very good thing to have the refresher course, if you will, with Latin 2, rather than just jumping immediately into Latin 3 or volunteering to be a teacher's assistant, which I probably couldn't be anyway. But yeah, that's basically what I have to say about that.
Okay, looking back, what is something you loved about your Kolbe years?
I myself particularly enjoy the clubs and talent shows that Kolbe hosted. The main reason for that is because, they were just a lot of fun. And for me, they were a reminder that life isn't just worky work, basically, if you want to say it that way. School is not just about the schoolwork, it's also about just the student life as well. And that's what these talent shows and clubs did, particularly the New Show Club and the Kolbe's Got Talent shows. Those in particular, along with Crazy Hat Hair Day, those were great reminders that the school doesn't just focus on classes and courses. It also heavily weighs in on the fun aspect of student life and just life in general, really, which I don't know if many schools do at this point.
Okay. What is something that you do differently about your Kolbe years?
Well, there's not really much I would change, except that I wish I took more language classes. Dr. Owens was probably going to sit right there like, wait, what? I mean, I was in Latin for all 4 years, but I really do wish I learned Spanish or French.
Yeah.
Because those are extremely useful languages, and I never took the opportunity to learn those. Knowing another language, like knowing one language is great, but knowing even more is even better.
Okay. Any other ways that Kolbe has prepared you for where you are now?
Well, once again, it is the rigorous curricula. And it's, like I said earlier, because Magdalen seems to be less, I don't want to say challenging, but that's probably the way to do it. Magdalen seems to be less challenging than Kolbe itself. And that's coming from a person who did not do full-time online Kolbe. He only did like half online stuff.
Do you find that maybe that has made more room for you to make other adjustments to life, like living in a new place or more on your own or anything, any of those other sort of life things?
Adjusting from harder to easier makes things easier. Um, yeah, l- since Magdalene seems to be less challenging than Kolbe, it was easier to adjust from a much harder working environment to a slightly less harder working environment, hard working nonetheless, but it was easier to do that and also just ease into college life, I guess. And I feel like anywhere I go now with Magdalene soon to be shutting, that will probably be the same. Whether or not I would have gone to Benedictine or Christendom or University of Dallas or Ave Maria or where I am going, Holy Apostle Online, I feel like that would be the same because Kolbe, just because of its rigor, just is more challenging than the rest of those places.
Okay. And what would you tell current or prospective Kolbe families?
I would tell the Kolbe families to take full advantage of the homeroom courses and theology courses. In regards to homeroom, I only ever took 2 years of homeroom, and I honestly wish I took all four. But my first one was 11th grade with Dr. Hassler, and my second was with Mrs. Crawford, 12th grade. Homeroom usually comes off as a fun class or whatever, and it definitely is. But the way that my teachers used it was to prepare me for all aspects of college, really, from applications to scholarship applications to everything else you could think of. Particularly Dr. Hassler's course of homeroom 11th grade was a rather important and pivotal um, course for me to figure out where I was going, what I wanted to do, because at the time I was definitely bent on going to Benedictine. But I suppose that course, along with summer programs, helped me choose Magdalene College.
Okay. Okay.
Was there anything that you found more challenging than expected when you transitioned from Kolbe to Magdalene?
Yeah, it was switching from online to real life. But that's pretty much it because, everything else was easier, but switching from an online sphere to an in-person sphere, it's harder because you haven't necessarily figured out all your social abilities, especially if you're me who has a neurological impairment um called autism. So, but it's because of that another thing I would actually tell Colby families is also do like a co-op of sorts, not like a private school, but do a co-op of sorts with other families in your church or surrounding area. I would suggest church so that you have like a a week, 1 day a week co-op meetups where you have in-person um gatherings or whatever, because that definitely helped me a lot in regards to coming to an in-person school. That's ultimately what I would say is that the only real challenging thing was switching from online to in-person.
I mean, I felt that when I started teaching at Magdalene because I had been teaching online for basically my whole teaching career, except a few courses here and there before, but to do it as a profession. And it was the little things for me, like writing on a board instead of copying and pasting things in, or just referring to things in the book, instead of being able to display the text in front. That was my first year was a little rough actually with that. Now it's fine. I actually love teaching in person, but at the beginning that was a challenge, just that little thing.
It makes sense. It's understandable. Okay, Charlie, your turn in the hot seat. How have you seen your Kolbe years benefiting you since graduating?
When I think about my time with Kolbe and what I've held on to since I left Kolbe, I think a lot of it goes back to what Dr. Almanzar was saying with kind of the comfortability with your background and being comfortable in your own skin. I think that from a non-technical perspective, I think that's probably the biggest takeaway is you get you are instilled with this confidence that you're doing things a little bit differently, and that's just fine, and um, you can still be competitive in the world, and you can still go out and make your way. So I think when I think about Kolbe now, and there's less of the specific technical things that I learned that I apply to my life. I think a lot about that and just comfortability. With that said, there is still a lot of technical things I apply. Like I think about a rhetoric class I took when I was a junior or senior. I think it was with Mrs. O'Connor. I still use that every single day. I feel like every email I write, every time I give a presentation, even when I'm just on calls with folks I work with, I think I try to apply those. I'm always very skeptical of people making arguments, just saying listen to me because I have authority. That was like the number one takeaway from the rhetoric class was don't trust those arguments. So just things like that I think about a lot. So yeah, I think as I get farther away from Kolbe, there's kind of the more metaphysical side of it, which is just I think you get from a young age, you learn how to be confident in yourself and being different, and then from a technical perspective, rhetoric stuck with me. The Latin with Dr. Almanzar really helped with root words and yeah, just a lot of small things like that.
Charlie, I wanted to ask because I played sports at the public school in high school and all of that stuff, and I had a good circle of friends. In a lot of ways, I was like the leader of these guys, like my group of friends, even though I didn't go to the school. And so the transition then to college and all that, I didn't really experience maybe what Ian says that he felt in going to college, and all of a sudden you're around people and you can't just be your online self or whatever. I don't ever remember that being a challenge for me. And I kind of, for you, I don't expect it really was either, but I don't know. How did, was there a transition there that was rough at all for you?
I think the short answer is yes, the transition was tough. And I think it's not really, you don't realize, at least for me, I didn't realize how tough it was when I was going through it. I kind of realized retroactively that it was happening. And I think it really goes back to kind of what you said about your online profile. Like I was really lucky to be part of a homeschooling group, and I played rugby in high school, and I was part of a lot of plays. Like I had a wide group of friends, whether it was like public school kids that played on the West Hartford football team that I played rugby with in the spring, or like people that I would take classical guitar with, or other folks that were really interested in theater. Like it was a wide gamut, and I was kind of there's a different, to a certain extent, different like profile you exhibit to those different groups, right, to fit in. And then when you get to Kolbe, I think especially online, and this isn't something I realized until recently, but you do kind of project this image of like who you want to be. And I think there's an element of that with Kolbe, because you don't see your classmates unless you make it to graduation and you're in person in Atlanta, right? So I think I realized retroactively that there was a little bit of that, right? Be the rugby player for the rugby folks, being the like the drama kid with the drama kids. So I think there was a little bit of that. That's probably a pretty stereotypical high school experience, but kind of to your question, when you go to college, and when I got to college and it was make a friend group there, I think a lot of my freshman year was trying to sustain the same thing, where you were just one thing to different groups on campus. And then when we were traveling abroad in my sophomore year, and I was in Italy at the time, and it was just like a turning point. It was a really interesting semester. We were learning a lot from the courses we were taking. But I think also just from a relationship perspective, it was a very tight knit group, because I think there were less than 100 of us, and we were on a pretty small campus. And so you didn't really have the comfort of like going back to your dorm room to kind of put on a new costume to go back out into the world to a different group. Like you just kind of were who you were. And then everyone kind of got to know each other. And I think there was like, I just look back at that time as a really cool moment, because I think it was where kind of a lot of things melded together. And I think it's where a lot of that confidence came that I talked about before, where you become confident and proud of being a homeschooler, and proud that you did rugby, and proud that you did drama. Like you become proud of all these things that you might have previously hidden to one group or another group, and it kind of melded together. And what I mean by that is, like, in the moment, I don't think I've realized that was happening. Like, I didn't realize that was kind of trial by fire. But when I look back at it, I just think that was a real turning point, honestly, for my life, where I just feel like I was able to just become kind of more of a unified person. So, well, that's a long answer to a short question, but I think, yeah, there was a challenge there, but I'm happy there was. I think I grew a lot from it.
Speaking of being in the hot seat, I would I wonder, think you may not be thinking about this much already since little Charlie is so young, but would you consider homeschooling him when he's of age?
Yeah, I definitely would. I think with me, I'm realizing that, like, education is so important, and it's not really something that's going to sound so obvious to most of the people on this call, but I didn't really think about it until I was kind of holding him, and I was joking with my wife. When I saw him, like, so many things come to mind, but, like, one of them was like, oh my gosh, he's going to have to go to school, and I'm going to have to pay for school. And then I started thinking about, like, what did my parents do? And I think back to that, and it's like, wow, we had Kolbe, but we also had, like, a homeschooling group, and they also, like, my grandma gave me music lessons. Like, there's so many things that go into education, and Kolbe was a massive part for me. So I'd be lying if I didn't say it was a frequent discussion with my wife and I, when we talk about kind of our future and the future for our family. It's like kind of it's like the foundation of it is what kind of education do we want to provide for our kids. And I had an amazing answer with Kolbe, so yeah, I'd definitely be open to it.
I always think it's kind of an interesting situation with Kolbe because I am maybe not proudly a public school product from a long time ago now. But so for me, the first time where I could really choose something, or my family, from in my case, it was me choosing something, was that college. Otherwise, it was this is the only school locally. I'm going there and I'm going to study what they're studying. And so, going off to Thomas Aquinas College, which was my first college, it was like, okay, I'm now with people who have all chosen this. But Kolbe's so interesting because it's so rigorous and unique, but people from around the world can choose that. So everybody's there because they've chosen it. It's not like, well, that's the only option, or that's the best Catholic school in my county or anything. So there's kind of, it seems to me there's a bond just amongst the students, even if you've never met one, but your families chose the same thing. That seems to me to be a powerful connection.
True. So what's something you loved about your Kolbe years, Charlie?
Ian brought this flood of memories back when he said talent show, but I think talent shows would have to be one of them. I really enjoyed those. I think courses like the Hunger Games course I really loved because it's just so different, and I think it gave you kind of the creative freedom to just, like, think about things you wouldn't otherwise think about, right? So, like, when you'd be able to look at kind of a book like The Hunger Games, something that was written more recently and probably wouldn't be referred to as like one of the great works of literature in human history, right? But you could look at it and give it its due by justifying it with, like, a class and just thinking about, okay, it might not be considered kind of what we're going to put in, like, the canon of Western Civ, but for what it is and for being a product of the moment in time that we find ourselves, like, what are we learning from it? What does it tell us about our culture? What does it tell us about how to read the works of our time? And I think that was really cool because when I talked to my friends on, like, the rugby team or public school, or maybe folks that I was doing theater with that were private school, like, it didn't seem like there was a lot of that in high school. It seemed like that was something that was maybe you'd go to college to do, but we got to do it at a young age in Kolbe. And I think it gave me kind of an open mind to when I'm trying to educate myself now, and when I'm looking around, like, you can find value in all sorts of things. And so I think really fondly about things like that. And then I'll shout it out again, but, like, my rhetoric class, you don't hear a lot of, like, kids going and getting a rhetoric class when they're in 11th grade, but that's not too young for it. And I think honestly, the earlier you plant that seed, maybe the better, because you have that time and you get to apply it more. So I think really fondly about those things.
Okay. And what would be something you do differently about your Kolbe years?
Yeah, this is probably the most cliche, like ex-student thing to say, but I would try harder in all my classes. I'd like read more. I'd try to remember the concepts. I was really privileged to be able to go to Kolbe and then go to a great liberal arts school and study what I wanted to, which was drama, and just really dive into that. And there were too many moments when I look back that I took it for granted, or I studied for a test versus studying to learn. And now when I'm working and I've got other things taking up my time, I go back at our orientation at UD. I remember the now president, he was the provost at the time, but President Sanford said, like, when you think about your time at the University of Dallas and just generally what the time when you're in school, it's leisure, right? This is not work. It's leisurely to be able to sit around and think these big thoughts and read the greatest works humans have ever constructed, right? So think about it as leisure. And too many times I thought about my time with Kolbe or my time at UD as work and studying for a test. So I wish I could go back and maybe just spend like a day thinking about Achilles and just not really worrying about anything else, or just spend a day thinking about, I don't know, like Henrik Ibsen. So that's what I do differently.
That's a real challenge with school. I mean, because like as you were talking about like that Hunger Games, it's like, well, your mind's probably already been formed to some extent, so you're able to do that. But I mean, like you're saying, but it's the Iliad. I mean, when you can look back at it like five years and say, why didn't I just really relish that time? Well, because there's the paper and there's the test, and so there's that stress there. But I think as teachers and as a school, I mean, because yes, it's valuable that you read the Iliad, and yes, it's good that you develop the skills. Those are all important, but it's even, I think, more important that here 5 years after you graduate, you have the ability and the interest to pick it up again and to keep learning, because it's just the start when you're in high school. You know, we lose all of our students just as they're going to be, in my mind, really fun. You know, so then we can go further, but then it's off and the rest of the journey is ahead of you, I guess.
Yeah, I think that was something that I when I talk about it being like a privilege to have been part of Kolbe and then part of a liberal arts school, is that I think the repetition is so important. Because now it's like when I look at my bookshelf, like I've got a lot of the same books I'd like read during Kolbe, I had to reread again. So now it's a lot more, if I had, because I had it like at Kolbe first and then I had it one more time, it's a lot more likely that I'll pick it up for a third time now as an adult than if I hadn't had the opportunity that Kolbe gave me, where you kind of at a young age you like grow up with these books. So yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, and then when you pick the books back up, it's like visiting with old friends. I have my copy of Augustine's Confessions, and I had used it for Kolbe, and then I had a class in college that I used it for, and I ended up with two different colors of highlighters in the same book for those two classes, just because of what was around. And I've gone back and read it a couple more times and like purposely used a different highlighter each time, and it's really interesting to see. It's almost like a scrapbook of like, okay, what of this wisdom stuck out to me when I was 17, when I was 20, when I was 26, now in my 30s. It's cool to have those resources and to get to revisit these timeless pieces of wisdom and timeless parts of the Western canon.
And I'm happy you brought that book up specifically, Hope, because that was like that. Talk about a great book to reread at different ages. I feel like I've done the same thing. I'm not as diligent with my highlighting, but I've gone back to that book kind of every every few years. I was joking with my little brother about it. Like that is just such a companion, and such an old book that remains so true and so relevant. And this is just if you're looking for some extra reading, there's this book called Late Have I Loved Thee by Ethel Mannon. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's this like beautiful, it's a work of fiction, but it's all based around Augustine's Confessions. It's called Late Have I Loved Thee. I think it's out of print now, but my wife got me a copy of it. And it just, if you like Augustine's Confessions, it's just this beautiful like allegory on it. So I'd recommend that.
There's a lot of wisdom to introducing our students to St. Augustine during their Kolbe years. What's one way Kolbe prepared you for where you are now? I think you've mentioned several, but what comes to mind at this point?
Yeah, I think honestly, a lot of the technical stuff, like when I think about the way that I communicate is huge. When you like in stumbling over myself a bit, but I guess when you're in an online academy, when you're in the online environment, before everyone else had to learn how to communicate during COVID, kind of I had a jump start on, okay, like I don't have the luxury of when I give a presentation on something, having people being able to see all of my body language or just all that other communication that's nonverbal, right? I don't have that opportunity. So in high school, I had to kind of learn how to do that. So I think technically it really helped because now a lot of my work is virtual. So I learned how to communicate there, and communication is really everything. So I think it technically really helped me with that. And I think Kolbe, Ian made a great point, which is that Kolbe has such a rigorous curriculum. I think from a young age, when you're part of Kolbe, like you just learn how to handle your time. So I got my own little calendar when I was in 6th or 7th grade, and I started filling it in. And at the time I had magic markers to kind of color code what my classes were. But that is like I'm looking at 5 different colored Sharpies on my desk that now dictate my adult calendar. So that stuck with me. So I honestly, a lot of technical stuff has really helped me still.
Hope's got hers handy. She's got a rainbow of colors too. And what would you tell current or prospective Kolbe families?
It's a great idea to do Kolbe, and I'm not just saying it. I think it's such a powerful gift to give your kids. I think it's something that pays dividends the older you get, because it just those things. And I'm really reminiscing, but like kind of what Dr. Almanzar was saying at the beginning, like I feel like this is coming from all the wisdom of someone who is not very old yet, but it seems to me that the way life works is the older you get, the more stuff that you did that was maybe unconventional or not what everyone else did kind of becomes all the stuff that's like the most important and what makes you more interesting and like what contributes to your success. And it just seems like that seems to be the pattern thus far. So we'll see how long it goes. But by that logic, I just think it pays dividends down the road. And I think that confidence that you have kind of as a kid, when you have to learn to be able to go to get a haircut at Supercuts at 11 a.m. on a school day, and you have to take those questions, right? It's kind of like you're up in front of Congress getting questioned, right? But when you learn to take those at a young age, you have no other choice than to become confident in yourself and what you're doing. And I think that is such a intangible gift that will like benefit your kids forever. So
there seems to be this thread running through of the work that happens now. We aren't able to see all of the fruits of it right now. Thank you, Charlie. All right, Hope. Now it's you.
Okay.
How have you seen your Kolbe years benefit you since graduating?
Kolbe gave me an integrated worldview, and that has been such a huge benefit moving through education, the work world, adult world, to understand that everything is connected. And it's overwhelming when you're in the midst of Kolbe and you're like, why is King Cyrus popping up in this class and that class and this other class? And what's going on here? And why are there all of these cross references? This is confusing. But it really does come together into understanding that none of the stories, none of the people who you learn about in history or who you interact with in daily life only fit in the box of how you're learning about them or interacting with them at any given time. There's the overall ecosystem and world of society has so much going on at any given time, and to be able to understand and appreciate and be able to zoom in and out between the big picture and the really concrete details, I think Kolbe taught me really well how to focus, all the way down into the Merovingian line or something like that, but then also to be able to zoom all the way out into, when people call it the Dark Ages, were they actually the Dark Ages? And these guys have already talked about how like the specific references and things like that start to fade as you get farther out. And now that I'm 13 years out, I'm not going to go any farther into any of the specific things. I'm just proud I remembered the word Merovingians. But like, the more distance you have, I think, from the threads of that tapestry, the more that you get to appreciate the beauty and the complexity of the overall tapestry of creation and the wisdom of the ages that's been handed down to us and that we're contributing to now as well.
What's something you loved about your Kolbe years?
So since I was a Kolbe student before the online academy was a thing, all of my classes were just our mom and me working through books. And so I really love the flexibility of that. Bonnie's kids were really small when I was in high school. And so sometimes we would rearrange it so that we did school 3.5 or 4 of the 5 weekdays. And then we spent a day with the nieces and nephews. And I had various extracurriculars, different things like that. I really appreciated being able to move things around, being able to have undisturbed blocks of time. We learned we had to block off Monday and Tuesday, that if we didn't get a good start on Monday and Tuesday, that the whole week kind of slid away from us. But then once we had that solid foundation at the beginning of the week, being able to adjust and go to supercuts at 11 o'clock in the morning, or go to museums when it was not spring break week and we had more space and time to ourselves to enjoy things. So I really appreciated the flexibility, and I know that that's not necessarily applicable to the online classes, but I think that there is something to be said for learning both the joy of having the flexibility and the responsibility that comes with it. Because if you take too much advantage of that flexibility, then all of a sudden you're staring down at a very large pile of work that should have been done that hasn't been done. And at least in my case, when I would get to that point, then flexibility was no more, and I didn't get to do anything fun until I gotten caught up. And that was a good life lesson too, of like how to, like Charlie with his color coding, or I love color coding too, or like just learning how to balance like short-term and long-term time management was also really good.
And what would you do differently if given the chance?
So the biggest answer for this is I would start before 9th grade. We used different curricula until 9th grade, and it took forever to get caught up on the Greek mythology and various things like that. And then there were also just some gaps because the other curricula we had used, especially in middle school, the sequence of the history that it taught was different than Kolbe's. And so I ended up with some places where things duplicated each other, and then also some places with gaps. So I would start before 9th grade, but as far as things I would do differently, while I was a Kolbe student, I was a night owl. I would often work on school and I fell asleep at 8:30 p.m. earlier this week. So yes, was.
Yes, that's true.
But that is a fairly recent development. Turning 30 does that to you. But no, I'd stay up really late. I would sleep in, and I liked that flexibility, but that was a hard adjustment going to college and all of a sudden having like 8 or 9 o'clock classes, because I was used to a more PM centric schedule. So I would do that differently.
All right. What's one way Kolbe prepared you for where you are now?
It gave me this foundation and trust that humanity really only has a handful of basic problems, and they show up throughout history and throughout societies with different wrapping paper. And that's made it a lot more, well, I was going to say a lot more peaceful, and that's not really the right phrasing. I found myself a lot less affected by current events and kind of the polarization of news and various commentators on recent events, because I have such a depth of context to fit it into, and to recognize that the things that we're seeing today are not, they're not new. Just the wrapping paper is new. And that combined with, in our, I think it was in 12th grade, the theology class spent about a week, I think, on this one paragraph of the catechism that talked about the world journeying toward a state of greater perfection, and understanding this like foundation of humanity having basic issues, but yet the world is still journeying toward greater perfection, has really given me a foundation to participate in public life and to be aware of what's going on in the world without being kind of swept up in the waves of immediacy that I think a lot of people are now.
And what would you tell current or prospective Kolbe families?
Trust the process. I did not trust the process when I was especially a 9th and 10th grader, and especially when I was reading all the Greek and Roman battles and I was in Henley Latin and things like that. So Bonnie and I are sisters. I have the stronger temper of the two sisters. And you don't have to leave that in if you don't want to, Bonnie, but I would yell at our mom and I would say, I hate Kolbe because you're desensitizing me to pain and suffering and war and these terrible things, and I don't understand why you're making me do this. And she would say, you'll see why someday. And that really has come true. She was right, as she usually is. But we had kind of blind trust at that point because we didn't know anybody who had done Kolbe. We didn't have anyone nearby who was also using it. And so, yeah, I had the word of my parents saying, we think that this is a good investment, but I didn't have any examples of like getting to listen to the Kolbecast or getting to share stories with online classmates of actually seeing that the process does come together. And even as the specific examples of things that you've studied start to fade into this bigger kind of just mosaic of experiences and formation, that it really does come together, and you can't see it in the moment. But it's fascinating to me to hear like what Ian has said and what Charlie has said and what I'm saying, and how they all fit together and they're all different. And we've all gotten, like, before we recorded this, I wondered if any of our answers were going to be kind of duplicative. And so far, they really haven't, because there's just so much richness to the formation as well as the education that comes from Kolbe. So,
Like that mosaic. It's beautiful.
A little interesting for me because as I said, I wasn't homeschooled, but my oldest daughter is now 3 years out of high school, and I've got more going through. So I'm experiencing it from a parent. And so it's nice to hear all of your stories, because it is, I mean, for me, it's just so wonderful to have my children really engaging these things, but then being able to sit down for, an hour in the evening with my son or my daughter and talk about them and kind of go over them, because I've had at least a lot of the same material through my Thomas Aquinas College education. And it's just so wonderful. I just can't imagine going back to, doing what I did, where it's off to school early in the morning, you spend all day with strangers and come back and do homework or extracurriculars and catch up with your parents every once in a while. And I still have had a good relationship with my parents, but it's not the same. It's just, but hearing all of these, it's just like, oh, I'm getting to watch some of that start to unfold now with my children and their development too. So it's lovely.
Yeah, I would echo that. This is every time that we've been together, like on one of these, even with the current people, except for Ian, I'm looking at it from the Kolbe side of things, my role at Kolbe. But this year, my kids are all in Kolbe, and it's been awesome for them. I really see them growing, and so this advice, trust the process, and different things like that. Now I'm taking it in a more personal way, and to see, someone like Charlie who's got his own kid now and had been through it, thinking, would I do that for them? I did not. I was unschooled. I didn't have any kind of curriculum or anything. So I want that for my kids. What's been testified about today by the, sorry to use a term like testified, but what's been what's been I don't know what these examples from products of Kolbe, if we can call them that. It's been awesome and great talking with everybody again.
Sure has.
I think I'd love to just echo a really important point that Hope made, that I wish I had brought up myself, but about the integrated nature of the Kolbe experience, and just how impactful that is to see the same figures appear across multiple disciplines. That is such a huge gift to give a kid, because it's like it no longer is it, am I good at math or am I good at English, right? It's like you see the collision of the people that are historical figures that discovered the mathematical concepts that you're studying, right? Even something like as simple as that, the integration is huge. And it's what, like, my favorite works now, and what I love to do now is read kind of, in addition to all these source texts that I got in high school and college, read writers like Paul Johnson, or with Modern Times, or the other one that comes to mind is like The Education of Henry Adams. Like these great works where you see that they're pulling from all these source texts that you've read as well, and you see these great thinkers kind of put together. Like I've read all the source texts, and this is my vision of how we interpret history, right? And I just think it gives you the tools to be able to do that later in your life. So I just echo the integrated being a massive part of it and a huge benefit. That was a great point.
Reading the source texts yourself, we've used this phrase on previous episodes, really makes you feel like you have a seat at the table. And I've talked to people who don't have an education similar to mine, who talk about being really intimidated to pick up St. Augustine or something like that. And I understand, because they are intimidating works, but kids are fearless in a way that a lot of adults aren't. Like they don't know to be intimidated yet. And so starting that early, starting that young, and then getting to revisit both the source great thinkers themselves and then people building off of them is a real gift that also supports what we had been talking about just being comfortable as your own person.
And that's another thing that has stood out as we've been visiting with Kolbe alumni over these 200 plus episodes at this point, is how comfortable they are in their own skins. And I admire that greatly. All right, you all, it's been great seeing you guys again and catching up a bit. Know of our prayers for you, and hope you'll continue to keep in touch with us. Thanks so much for coming.
Thank you for inviting me for this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Subscribe to the Kolbecast on your favorite podcast app so that you don't miss an episode. And let us know how we're doing by leaving a rating or a review. And as always, feel free to email us at podcast@kolbe.org.
Mary, our Mother, pray for us. St. Maximilian Kolbe, St. Ignatius of Loyola, holy saints and angels, pray for us. Ad Maiorem Dei Gloriam.